Hello, Big Man Up Top listeners, Ed here. You're about to hear this week's episode of The Big Man Up Top, where we discuss business, and in particular touch on the recent news surrounding Manchester United and Jim Ratcliffe, the cuts and redundancies at the club, and the protests from this past weekend. Almost immediately after recording the episode on Monday afternoon, Jim Ratcliffe gave an interview where he addressed some of the issues that we speak about in this episode. He mentioned that some players are overpaid and not good enough. He also, amongst other things, spoke of his sympathy with the fans for some of the difficult decisions he's had to make. On the back of this interview, on Tuesday morning, Manchester United announced plans for a massive new 100,000-seater stadium that may or may not look like a circus. Myself, Joe, and producer Anthony still feel our chat is really relevant, although we just wanted to let you know that some of the information may be a bit out of date, given the fast-paced environment that is football media. Or is that just the soap opera surrounding Manchester United? Who can say? Anyway, we hope you enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the podcast that is a tucked-in, short-sleeved shirt kind of podcast. It's the Big Man Up Top.
Yes, it is. Hello, Ed.
Hello, Joe. How are you?
Yes, doing very well. Are you okay?
I'm fantastic, thank you. What are your thoughts on tucking in shirts or long-sleeve shirts? What do you think?
In football or just generally?
No, in football, I mean.
Yeah, I've never tucked in.
Oh,
I'm always
tucked in,
yeah.
short sleeves. That's the way forward. No messing about.
What are we going to talk about today, Ed?
We are going to talk about business, Joe.
Business,
yes. There's been a lot of chat about Man United, hasn't there, recently?
There has.
Lots of conversation about cost cutting, lots of discussion about things like redundancies at the club. And so we thought we'd actually get somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Yes, because neither you or I run a business.
No, I'd be nervous for everybody involved if we did. So we're actually going to have a chat about that and about what it means to run a football club as a business. But before that, Joe, did you hear the news about Coldplay?
I did. This is around the World Cup in America, isn't it?
That's right. So FIFA have announced that at the World Cup next year in 2026 in Mexico, the US and Canada, there is going to be a World Cup final halftime show, just like in the Super Bowl.
It doesn't feel right to me, Ed.
No.
It's a very American thing, isn't it? And obviously the World Cup is in America.
Yeah.
So is it a nod to their culture?
Possibly. Coldplay have been not necessarily asked to play, but they've been asked to produce the segment.
They're kind of designing the whole thing.
Yeah, I wonder if it's one of those player-manager situations. Are they allowed to pick themselves?
I think we need to give Diana Ross another chance.
For any of you that didn't see that at the time or don't remember it, she was supposed to hit this ball at this sort of constructed goal that was about 2 feet in front of her. And the idea was the ball would hit the net and then the goal would collapse. And so what happened was she hit the ball, it went wide, and then they didn't really know what to do and they just collapsed the goal anyway. It does the whole thing look like a right mess.
I just think this is a great opportunity. Give her another penalty.
Yeah.
I'd love that so much.
I think we should do some trivia, Joe, don't you?
Yeah, let's do it. This week I will be questioning you, Ed, in our regular feature, Bible Ballers.
How exciting.
Now, this is Guess a Player with a Difference. The player that I want you to guess will share his first name with the name of a book in the Bible. Are you ready for this week's question?
Yes, go on then.
Which current Premier League player was once awarded the best young player in Serie A, scored on his debut for 2 different clubs, and has won a treble, including the Champions League, all by the age of 23?
Oh, goodness me. Very much not my wheelhouse at all.
No?
Just, football trivia. Specifically, any kind of football trivia.
Do you have any initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, played in Serie A, that doesn't necessarily mean Italian. And obviously, you don't tend to have that many Italians playing in the Premier League. I'll have to give this one a think.
Well, I'll give you a bit of time. Not too much time.
Okay.
But you'll have a bit of time to think about the answer to that one.
Another bumper weekend of Premier League action, Joe, wasn't it?
It's coming thick and fast, isn't it, Ed?
It certainly is. Should we start with Forest 1, Man City 0? I think that's a good place to start.
I think so. First game of the weekend. And I think you have to say this wasn't that much of a surprise,
no.
was it?
And this is it, is I think like a year ago, this would have been a huge result, wouldn't it?
Even 6 months ago, I think.
Yeah, but all of a sudden, actually, Forest winning 1-0 against an underperforming City side. Forest doing very, very well. Yeah, it was very much the expected result, I think
so. And I think it was very much the style of play that Forest have tried all season, sitting back, inviting the attack, and then hitting them on the break. A lovely ball by Morgan Gibbs-White to set Hudson-Odoi free on the wing, and then a strange near-post finish to win the game. But I don't know if this is controversial to say, Ed, but I've always found City quite boring to watch.
Right.
Even in the treble-winning year, like they
were ruthlessly efficient,
exactly,
weren't they, rather than being particularly exciting.
And now they're boring without any of the goals, so even more boring. You just watch them, and it's an aging squad. They just have no cutting edge.
Yeah, they've really lost 5% of everything that they had, and at the Premier League at that level, 5% is everything, isn't it? You know?
I also feel like this is kind of a tale of two sets of wingers in this game. So I think you look at Forest wingers have been the story of their season, I would say, along with Chris Wood up front. You've got Anthony Elanga, Hudson-Odoi on the wing, just bombing forward, counter-attack, electrifying pace. And then you compare to City's wingers, they had Doku and Savinho on the wing for this game, Foden in the middle, and they just don't look like they've got anything going forward. Same with Jack Grealish when he plays, I don't know, they're missing something going forward.
Yeah, it's a bit of inspiration, isn't it? It's a bit of fight. It doesn't feel like the issue's on the pitch, it's in the mind, I think, with City, and it just doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon.
No, it doesn't, and it seems the only thing they now have to play for is Champions League football and the FA Cup, and that's a disappointment.
Very much so.
You have to say. Let's move on to Spurs 2, Bournemouth 2. Game of the weekend,
I think so. This was a real thriller, wasn't it?
It was. Bournemouth very impressive, I thought, throughout this game. They looked really good going forward, particularly on the break. And I think Justin Kluivert is one of the most exciting players in the league right now.
I think the goal at the beginning for Bournemouth with the Kirkez assist, that incredible interception, bombing it down the wing, first time whipped in cross to the far post, stunning goal, and very much feels like the way that Bournemouth are playing. They also had a goal chalked off for offside, which was one of the best goals I've seen in weeks.
Oh, brilliant.
Lovely, lovely move. And it's not just the fact that they've been playing well, it's the kind of football they're playing. Exactly the opposite of Man City. They are playing exciting, free-flowing football, aren't they?
And I think with Bournemouth, you fear for them over the summer, don't you? They've had such a good season. You would not be surprised if they get raided a little bit.
Yeah.
I think
they've got that kind of squad, haven't they? Yeah. A few players are going to get picked up, and you know.
Even the manager as well. I think he's even been linked with Real Madrid, which is how well he's doing.
What do you think of Spurs in this game? How do you think they've done? Because we had a bit of a difference of opinion here, really.
I think they were quite lucky to salvage a draw in this person. The goal they pulled back through Sarr was definitely a mishit cross.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
And I think the penalty, I think it was just stupid from Kepa. I think we could see it coming a mile off. So I think they were quite lucky to get a draw from this.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but I was quite impressed by Spurs because they have just been one of those lukewarm teams all throughout the season. And to go 2-0 down as they did, they really actually showed some real character and grit, I thought, to get themselves back in it. Maddison, just every time he has the ball, he forces opportunities, he forces chances. Obviously, he has his frustrating side as well, but having a player like him and other players that respond to that around him, definitely a miss-hit cross, definitely a daft penalty given away by the goalkeeper. But I actually thought, you know what? At 2-0 down, you always take 2-2, don't you?
You'd take the draw for sure. But where do you see Spurs going from here? Like, do you think Ange is safe? Do you think they'll be looking elsewhere in the summer?
For me, Ange is clearly the kind of manager who can do something really great at Spurs. He can do. The potential is there. And I just think Spurs need to stop performing as they have done in terms of the boardroom and just giving him another 6 months and him sacking him mid-season or whatever it might be. I think they just need to give him years in this job and let him build something.
That's what you saw. The last time they had a successful manager was Pochettino, and they gave him time. It wasn't like when they brought Conte in or Mourinho in as a proven winner. And the appointment of Ange felt like that as well. I just don't know. I don't know if he can cut it at the highest level. He's got this very distinctive style of play. I don't think it's solid enough for the Premier League.
Let's move on to Man United versus Arsenal. This, obviously, back in the day, was the big, fiery Premier League classic.
You always get the montages before this game.
Yeah.
Van Nistelrooy and Keown.
And Vieira and Roy Keane and all
classic.
that. It's good stuff. So this one finished 1-1. What did you think of this one, Joe?
Well, again, it's the story of the season for both teams for me. I think United, they seem to be able to turn up for bigger games. They had quite a slow start in this one, but they really got into it. Defensively, quite good. And again, Bruno just saving them.
Being the difference maker, wasn't he? Again, similar to what we said last week, is you do fear for where United would be if they didn't have Bruno in.
And I think we're going to hear that conversation time and time again until they do something about it. Even Amorim himself, I'm getting a bit obsessed with his quotes. Every time he comes up with something different about how bad United are. But after this game, he said, we need more Brunos.
Yeah.
And he's talking about work rate, ability, that kind of thing. And I think if they had a few more players like him, they'd actually get somewhere. But they're just so overly reliant on him at the moment.
I thought Declan Rice had a really good game for Arsenal in a game where they were quite average and would feel like this feels like a frustrating dropped points. I thought Declan Rice did really well, took his goal well, but also just solid in midfield. He's one of those players that puts in that kind of performance most weeks and I don't think gets as much credit as he should.
No, he doesn't. And there was that challenge towards the end, last-ditch challenge on Højlund, which Højlund isn't in the best of form. I don't know if you'd backed him to put it away, but that challenge from Rice was game-saving. It was so good. Another player that played really well, I thought, was David Raya in the second half. A couple of really good saves. There was that effort from Bruno right at the end that was spinning towards the goal. Almost, would you call that a double save?
Well, yeah, because he saved it, didn't he? And then it was looping back into his net and he managed to claw it away. It was excellent acrobatics. Let's talk about this free kick, Joe. Let's talk about this Bruno Fernandes free kick and the controversy that has surrounded it.
I love this conversation. I think it's so funny. So if you didn't catch this, Anthony Taylor marked out the 10 yards for the wall for this free kick. And Gary Neville was saying in the commentary that wall looks quite far back. Fair play to him for spotting that. Because I don't think any of us
no one else can spot it with the naked eye, but Gary Neville can.
Neville can. He just has that ability. Bruno obviously scores it, but David Raya is towards the post, basically not on the pitch during this free kick. At half-time, Sky, they said they used some of their technology to measure how far back the wall was and measured it at 11.2 yards. So this has obviously sparked some debate about Anthony Taylor's legs.
So we thought we'd get some thoughts from somebody in the office, Joe. Lizzie here at UCB, who is an Arsenal fan and loves complaining about all of the things that are going on against her beloved club. I asked her for comment on what she thought about Anthony Taylor's legs being too long.
Hello, Ed. Well, it's quite obvious that Anthony Taylor has got a longer stride than what is natural for a referee to have. As science proved at half-time that the wall was 11.2 yards away. Then, not only that, Man United were allowed to edge forward on our free kick in the second half. So, talk about the dark arts of Arsenal. I feel like there's some dark arts going against Arsenal at the moment. But yeah, there's always next season, eh?
Well, there's always next season, eh? I feel like Arsenal could just have that on their badge as their motto
the
going
new club
forward.
emblem.
Yeah. But yeah, no, Lizzie not very happy at all. Now, this took a bit more of a turn even today, didn't it, Joe, when you sent me a video from Sky Sports?
Yeah, so every Monday morning, Sky Sports do this thing called Ref Watch, where they get Dermot Gallagher, ex-Premier League referee, to come in and discuss like the weekend's refereeing decisions on whether they were correct or not. It's the most Alan Partridge thing you've ever seen. They said, Dermot, can you mark out...
Can you pace out 10 yards?
And Stephen Warnock's walking next to him. Someone else behind him, Sue Smith, is holding back with the tape measure.
With the tape measure.
So you watch it and they say, "Oh, well done, Dermot. You've done 10 yards."
It's almost exactly 10 yards, Dermot.
So I send this to you, and then I come over and say, "Ed, has the video been deleted? Because I'm trying to watch it again and it's gone." And you point out there's a bit of black tape on the floor.
Yeah. And not only that, Dermot quite clearly takes 11 and a half steps as well. What is the footballing world coming to? Right, enough about referees' legs. Palace beating Ipswich 1-0, Joe.
Yeah, another win for Palace, and they're kind of going under the radar a bit at the moment. They've got 9 wins out of 11, and I feel like no one's really taking much notice of them.
Yeah, they've had one of those seasons where they've been very much picking up points against teams around them, just been quietly being very professional, haven't they? Nothing over the top, but playing good football, especially in the last few months, really stringing the wins together.
And they find themselves in 11th place. And although that sounds quite low down, they are in the conversation for European football this year, I think. That's such a tightly congested part of the table that I think they keep this run going, then who's to say they can't get at least Conference League?
Speaking of Conference League,
Good.
Liverpool beating Southampton 3-1.
Yes, not the most convincing
It
victory.
wasn't, was it?
Quite
No.
a slow start. I think there was some kind of hangover from midweek. Quite a difficult game in Paris. Didn't play particularly well. Managed to smash and grab a 1-0 win. A glorious night for Liverpool fans, I would say.
What do you think about Darwin Núñez, Joe? This is the big talking point for this game.
I thought he had a good game. I thought particularly the second half, obviously scored the equaliser. He won the penalty. Very much a penalty, I would say, Ed. I don't know if you disagree.
I thought that the second penalty was a bit dodgy. The Núñez one I thought was bob on. I was really chuffed for Darwin because I think he's had a lot of grief recently in terms of the chances and his body language, and Arne Slot's been a little bit critical of him. So I'm really chuffed that he got that goal.
He's actually had quite a good week. He set up Elliot's winner against PSG with some really good centre-forward play. And yeah, he's playing well at the moment. I think his all-round game is improving a bit. His finishing is still a bit suspect. But I think if you speak to Liverpool fans, they kind of put him in that same conversation that they used to have with Divock Origi. If you want to change a game, you bring him on. Particularly that PSG game, I think we're all crying out, game is perfect for Darwin. Just bring him on, cause some chaos.
I've got a bit of a roundup for the Championship as well, Joe.
Please.
I suppose the big headline from the Championship is it all going wrong at Leeds?
Not again.
1 point from the last 2 games after Portsmouth ended their 17-game unbeaten run, winning 1-0 at Fratton Park. Daniel Farke called for calm, which I think is going to serve to just sow panic among the fans and the players.
You don't want to hear that, do you?
Yeah, manager calling for calm is never a good sign. Burnley back to their brick wall selves against Luton, winning 4-0 after the visitors went down to 10 men early on. That's sort of what we were expecting, weren't we? And we discounted the FA Cup.
Yeah, that doesn't count, does it? No.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to bring this one up, Joe. A great day and a bad day at the office. Bristol City versus Hull. João Pedro scored in the 13th minute and then was promptly sent off in the 14th.
And this was a terrible challenge.
Oh, it
wasn't
was, yeah. So shortly after the kickoff, he's gone jumping in 2-footed into a tackle. Definite red card. I've never seen a referee run over so fast, blowing his whistle. Bristol City then managed to salvage a point after going 1-0 down. And then the other game, the Championship I wanted to pick up on was Coventry versus Stoke. Now, usually this season, I've been quite happy to not talk about Stoke a great deal.
Well, sometimes you try and shoehorn Stoke into the conversation, especially if they've won or picked up a point, which is seen as a positive these days. But it's nice to have a episode where it feels relevant to talk about Stoke.
I do have to tell you, Joe, about how I watched that game.
And please do.
It's a 12:30 game, so, it's never ideal, is it?
Forgettable.
So I found myself at a kid's birthday party, my dear friend Alex's daughter, and his father-in-law had opted to serve the drinks from the kitchen of the village hall with a little hatch. He just says, I'll do the drinks, I'll stay in the kitchen. I snuck in there. It turns out he had his laptop in the corner, he had the game on.
It's a great move.
After 5 minutes, there was a sort of a rotating cast of about 6 or 7 dads just crowded around this guy's laptop.
Yeah.
So Coventry won 3-2 in this one, and it's one of those situations where Stoke actually played really well and can feel genuinely quite hard done by. They went 2 down very early. Sam Gallagher came off the bench, scoring a second half brace, and then Coventry scored a 97th minute winner to take all 3 points. It was a big weekend in the Women's FA Cup, Joe, wasn't it?
Yes, so there was the Women's FA Cup quarter-finals this weekend. Chelsea beat Crystal Palace 1-0 with Lauren James scoring the winner after 2 disallowed goals. Liverpool also scraped through after beating Arsenal 1-0, leaving it late with an own goal by Arsenal's goalkeeper. Manchester City also waited till the second half to secure a 2-0 win over Aston Villa from goals by Khadija Shaw and Jess Park. And Manchester United completed the semi-final lineup with a 3-1 win against Sunderland.
This is the exciting point in the season now, isn't it? You know, semi-finals, it's all happening. You can get your hands on the trophy.
So, Ed, we thought it would be good to have a conversation a little bit about business.
Yeah.
And this is within the context of Manchester United. So there's been a lot of kind of discourse around this takeover that's happened within the last year with Ineos, led by Jim Ratcliffe. And it hasn't really gone that well, has it?
Well, I think it's safe to say that before Jim Ratcliffe was involved, there was a lot of negative feeling towards the Glazers. A lot of debt was loaded onto the club when they took over, and the club is still in significant debt. Last year, United paid £37 million just in interest on loans. So it sort of contributed to then Ratcliffe getting involved, having to pay £1.3 billion for a 30% stake in the club. But in with that, he's been allowed to make quite significant decisions regarding the running of the club, hasn't he?
And I think if you're a United fan, you saw this takeover happen and you heard that he was kind of taking control. You were probably quite encouraged by that. He's kind of built this team around him as well with a bit of a sporting background. He's got Dave Brailsford with him, who was involved in the Team Sky cycling team at the Olympics. But actually, he's kind of made some unpopular decisions of late. He's increased ticket prices to £66 per ticket. And we've spoke about this on a previous episode, but he's got rid of all concessions tickets. So every ticket costs the same. Not the only club to have done this, but it's a significant change. He's made quite a lot of redundancies. He initially made 250 redundancies, and then after that said that there would be no more. Then he's come recently and said there's another 200 roles to be slashed from the club.
There's also been some changes, hasn't there, around like the food that the staff are allowed.
Yeah.
What's that story?
Yeah, so traditionally the staff at Manchester United and Carrington at their training ground, they get their lunches made for them, and they've recently made the decision to stop this for non-playing staff, and they'd be allowed soup and bread, which I think is still quite good.
I'd take soup and bread if UCB offered it to me, Joe. Come on.
They're also allowed some fruit as well. But yeah, this has all come to a head in that United fans are continually not happy with the way the club is being run, so much so that they staged a protest at the weekend.
Well, yeah, and we are not the people to actually answer the question, should they be doing that or not, or how could they be doing that? But a friend of mine, Stephen Illingworth, who is a Christian and a businessman and also a Man United fan.
Ah, perfect.
I thought he would know a bit more about what it means to run a business and to do it well and to do it with Christian values. So here's my chat with Stephen. Stephen Illingworth, friend, businessman, general, lovely chap. How are you doing?
Well, I'm very well, thank you, Ed. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Let's start by just introducing yourself to our listeners.
I am the CEO and one of the owners of Widdop & Co, and we are a 143-year-old family business based in Manchester. We basically design and manufacture the things that you will find all over your house that you're not necessarily sure what brand they are or where they came from. So everything from furniture to Christmas decorations to the gifts you give for a birthday or a wedding. We cover 10,000 products, 35 brands ranging from Disney and Harry Potter stuff. And I run the business alongside my brother. And it has been in my family for 5 generations. And we acquired the business about 18 months ago from the rest of our family. So now there's just myself and my brother running our family's business and all that entails.
I imagine running a family business must present its own like unique rewards, but also challenges as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking that as you were talking, that it comes with its own highs and its own lows. There's rarely a day that's just mediocre. We obviously take it very personally. We treat our staff we try to treat our staff and everyone that we come into contact with in our supply chain, our customer base, as if they're part of our family by the services we offer, the way that we do things, and generally in the warmth and approach of trying to be a bit different in 2025 when the world is definitely a challenging place.
The reason we wanted to chat to you is that we've been having discussions about Man United in the last few weeks. There's been lots of discussion about things like cost-cutting measures, and there's been staff that have been laid off there and that sort of thing. Now, obviously, we don't know the ins and outs of specifically what's going on in the club there, but I wanted to get a sense from you. How does your faith impact your day-to-day running of the business? Because you are a Christian, but your business isn't a Christian business, you know. So how does your faith impact your work at Widup?
That's right. It's not a Christian business, and my brother's not a Christian, and we own the business together. So it impacts a lot because I often stand for things or question things or believe in things that others in the business and generally don't. Essentially, that means that I would be setting an example, really, is the key thing to how I operate. And I know there's a lot of debate in certainly my Christian world that I operate in as to whether being overt or covert about your Christian faith gets the ultimate goal of more people following Jesus. Actually, I guess I'm more of a covert person that believes that how you operate and what you do and how you speak should dictate more what people see in you rather than you forcing a message down their throat. We have 130 staff. I think we both operate with, especially in a family business, with a belief that the people come first, and we try to do that in everything, whether that's a decision about staff levels or about what we're trying to achieve on a strategy. I think we come at it from a very unique and professional perspective, and that is neither straightforward nor easy to maintain, especially in this environment. So especially as a Man United fan, I look at what's going on in the club, and actually my kids go to school with a lot of the players as kids and the coaches' kids, actually. And so I see them as people as well as people running a business and a football club. And I think the challenge they face, as probably we do in business, is they are ultimately running a business. And whilst you may love sport and you may love football and you may be a passionate fan of football as a sporting entity, to all intents and purposes, it can only operate if the club continues to make money. I know there's a lot of talk at Man United at the moment, in particular of them building new stadiums and investing in the future. And you're only able to borrow money. You're only able to spend like they're probably going to need to do for the future of their club if their business everyday items are in good working order. And I think that's probably what this is more about. But I face the same thing every day as we deal with banks and finance people. Ultimately, they don't care whether you're a football club or a home and giftware company. They ultimately care about the bottom line and how the business performs and makes them their money back. And that affects all of us. So I can imagine the challenges they face, particularly when the club is not performing on the pitch. And that makes it more difficult. And that's the same in our business. If we're not selling a lot or we're not finding new customers or opening new doors, the pressures mount and you have to do everything you can to try. And I've just made a couple of redundancies myself in our business in the last few weeks. You know, we all in business are operating in a very difficult environment right now. And I don't think that's largely understood, not in a way that people can be criticized for that. I just think ultimately it is hard to run a business in 2025, and with the new legislation and budgets and everything that surrounds doing business in our country right now, it's tough. And Man United is not an exception just because it is a great historic football club. In the same way my business is the oldest giftware company and homeware company in the UK. Your history cannot stand you apart in business decisions, and that's what makes it, I guess, more black and white and hard to make it about your faith. Where I see it from a faith perspective is when I'm doubting, when I'm struggling, when we're struggling, you've got to believe that the good times will come again. You've got to believe that God can bring rivers in the desert. You've got to believe that God can do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine. And I think that in business, in sport, in anything that is corporate, it is hard for people who don't have a Christian faith to believe for those good times when things are tough, or harder, I should say, than a Christian person's, perhaps.
That's really interesting. You mentioned having to make redundancies. I'm not in a position where I have to do that, and I think that must be a really incredibly difficult decision to make. How does your faith help in that situation when you've got to make some of the really tough decisions? How on earth does your faith help you to do that?
It gives you the strength to make the tough decisions and to do the hard things when you don't feel like you have it in your own power or gift. It gives you wisdom to make decisions that are bound by what God tells you to do, and that you're doing the thing that God's spoken of you. So therefore, you've got to make the right decision to keep that for the future. But also, the thing that I remind myself, or I've had to remind myself in the last few weeks, is that you need to constantly be focused on the bigger goal of what God has planned for you, and do everything possible to make the pain for yourself, for the people, for the business, I guess, in a self-sacrificing way, less important than what you feel. And that is, in the redundancy situation, yes, it's hard for me, but I'm keeping my job, right? So I always come at it from a place of empathy and try and come at it from a place of compassion. And therefore, even in the toughest decisions, when you act in that way, you can often find an articulate presence in the room that helps you to make the tough calls, to say the tough things, and still believe that you can look after people and care about their well-being, even when they, especially those that haven't got faith themselves, will throw that back at you. So yes, it's tough for me. It's often tougher for the person being made redundant, and it's often tough for the whole business as they think and feel an uncertainty about their own future that perhaps they didn't have before they realized that nothing lasts forever and that every job ultimately relies on a business transaction to take place. So it's hard.
Great chat there, Ed, with Stephen Illingworth. And I think he makes some really interesting points there about they're not a charity, it's a business. This might be a bit of a generalization, but Christians can be pushovers.
Yeah.
Right.
I think definitely like being a strong business person requires a level of ruthlessness that you would sort of say, does that vibe with the Christian way of life? I think that's a fair point to say. But I think people like Stephen show us that you can run a business and you can have heart and yet also be thinking about the bigger picture at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. And going back to United, I think this is such an interesting situation because it's important to remember that football clubs are businesses. Every business goes through this. They go through tough times. They go through difficult decisions. But rarely is there so much emotion attached from the outside of this. And it's important to remember that Jim Ratcliffe has inherited a terrible situation.
And it can't go on. They are absolutely hemorrhaging money, as I've said before. They cannot go on forever in this situation, and something has to be done to try and stem the bleeding. And Jim Ratcliffe is trying to do that. And on the one hand, I totally get that. Fair enough.
Turning attention to like the playing staff, obviously there's a lot of players here that are on quite significant wages. Thinking particularly about Mason Mount is on a lot of money. He's made 22 appearances in 2 seasons and only scored 1 goal. I think it's quite easy from an outside perspective to look at that and be like, why are you making 400 people redundant when you're paying this person ridiculous amount of money? Anthony as well, Rashford, all these underperforming players, which they have gone on to move those 2 players on. But what are your thoughts on that kind of conversation?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think that Mason Mount is not the only example, but he is definitely the starkest example. He's somebody who has cost them a lot of money in salaries and has not delivered. Now, what I would say is not just not delivered. He's barely been around to play because of injuries, and so on the one hand, you could argue that's not his fault, but on the other hand, it's not like he's turning up and trying hard. He just simply isn't there, and that is wasted money. You could look at other areas of wasted money as well. The 10 million that it allegedly cost to pay off Ten Hag, a similar amount that it cost for the buyout clause for Ruben Amorim as well. At a certain point, somebody has to come in and say, there is wasted money here. What are we going to do about it? And I think that's the difficulty is for the fans. They'll say, look, Mason Mount, yeah, if we weren't paying him, we could be funding this other stuff as well. I think that there's an issue if the Jim Ratcliffe cost cutting doesn't extend to analysing playing staff as well like that with future purchases. There's a difference with Mason Mount in that he was bought under the Glazer regime. And so I think if they're also putting in something that says, and in the future, maybe it's more performance-based pay incentives for players, something like that. But if they're also looking at the playing staff as well, then fair enough. At the end of the day, what we have to look at is the Bible. And what does Scripture say about this sort of thing? And actually, the Scripture is really, really clear. If you are being paid a lot of money because you are skilled at your job, then that is absolutely fine and fantastic and good for you. Scripture is quite clear in that. Scripture also talks about paying people fairly, but also Scripture talks about being prudent as well. So I think that the thing for me is that it does sort of feel like, well, are they being good stewards of their money, or are they simply enabling player greed by not cutting corners there as well? I don't know. There's a line somewhere, there's a balance somewhere, isn't there? But, you know, for me, if a player is worth his salary, that has to be demonstrated in some way. You could look at Liverpool and the issues around Salah, and there's all the just pay him his money stuff. But you can see there's an argument there for it.
Yeah.
Is that because of the goals he scores, because of the assists he scores, that the whole club is prosperous as a result. And so, yeah, I understand that argument.
Yeah, I think it would be good before we finish to have kind of that chat around stewardship, but also compassion. Stephen spoke in the interview about having to make hard decisions in business.
Yeah.
Now, like we've said before, we aren't in a position where we're having to make difficult decisions for a business, but maybe you're listening and you do. What's that balance between being a steward of the money and the power that we have within our work?
Well, I think there's a really interesting verse in Matthew 25, verse 23. It says, his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little, and I will set you over much. And I think that's sort of to do with basically, if you can be trusted with a small amount, you can be trusted with more. And I think that what it all boils down to is that good stewardship, but it's also good leadership as well. And you hear so many stories in the Old Testament about good kings and bad kings and things like that. And for me, it's all about the servant king, the servant-hearted mindset. Is when you're making decisions like this where, you know, you need to make redundancies, let's say, are you thinking about not just that person who, you know, is sat in the office and you've got to deliver that awful news to them, but are you thinking about the well-being of the wider staff? Sometimes you do need to make those decisions for a company or for a business or for an organisation.
We spoke about leadership recently, and a big part of that conversation was about transparency and honesty, and I think that plays a big role in how we can bring our faith into this. Look, I've got to make these difficult decisions. Here's the reasons why. I'm being honest with you. And I think that helps with this whole thing.
And I think making those decisions prayerfully as well. So somebody like Stephen, you know, these conversations will have to happen from time to time. These difficult decisions will have to happen. But if you can approach them with compassion, empathy, a heart of prayer and a servant heart, I don't think you can go far wrong, really.
Ed, are you ready to give me an answer for this week's trivia question?
Not at all, no.
Shall I read it to you again?
Yes, please.
Which current Premier League player was once awarded Best Young Player in Serie A, scored on his debut for 2 different clubs, and won a treble, including the Champions League, all by the age of 23?
Okay, young Serie A player won a treble that included the Champions League. Current Premier League player. That's what you're giving me.
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay. I'm really struggling with this one.
One of the debuts he scored on was this season.
So it's a recent addition to the Premier League then?
Are you going to give me an answer?
Are you going foreign Bible?
No, I'm not.
No,
I play it by the rules.
You're playing by the rules.
I will never do a foreign Bible because I don't believe in that.
don't believe in them.
Don't believe in foreign Bibles.
I'm going to have to pass.
Okay, well...
This is too hard, Joe. It's too hard.
Maybe you're just not clever enough.
That is true, yes.
Well, this player won Best Young Player at Serie A last season for Bologna. He scored on his debut this season for Manchester United in a 1-0 win at home to Fulham.
Oh, Joshua Zirkzee.
He won a treble for Bayern Munich in 2019 to 2020. You're correct. The answer is Joshua Zirkzee.
Oh, that's so frustrating.
That's quite the career already.
That is mad, isn't it?
Yeah, already won a Champions League and a treble.
Wow, goodness me. It was the treble that threw me. Are these questions too hard, Joe? That's what I want to know.
Well, maybe they are.
We've had some correspondence, Joe.
Oh, go on.
We had a lovely email from George. We've had this for a few weeks and forgot it was there.
Okay.
I made a note that we'd read it out. So apologies, George. He says, "Thank you, Ed and Joe. I'm not into football, though I am enjoying listening to the big man up top. Your banter and relating the Bible to sport/life is much appreciated. Keep it up. No pun intended."
Oh,
from
very
George.
good.
So thank you.
Very good.
That's lovely. And, I think, I want to hear from anybody who's listening to this podcast who isn't a football fan.
Yeah, why not?
It's great. That's such a fantastic little corner niche of our audience. So please get in touch and tell us what you hate about football. Thank you so much for listening to The Big Man Up Top. If you want to get in touch with the show, please ping us an email to podcasts@ucb.co.uk. Please follow, subscribe, give us good reviews, all that lovely stuff. This will help us to get the word out. Also, if you've enjoyed this, make sure you tell your friends. A huge thank you to our producer Anthony for all his hard work behind the scenes. And there will be a new episode next Tuesday, Joe, won't there?
Yes, there will.
See you next week.
See you then.